Good morning, everyone. It's fantastic to see you all here, and thank you very much for squeezing into a small space. It's great to see a really good turnout. My name is Ben Smith. I lead the Climate Sustainability Consulting Group here in London, and it's my job to welcome you all to Arup. So yeah, as I said, I'm really pleased that you could all make it this morning. I also have to do that kind of slightly awkward and dull announcement that you always have to have at this type of event, which is to let you know that if you do need the loo, you go through there and turn right. And that we don't have any planned fire alarms this morning, so if you do hear a fire alarm, it is real. We'll go out the building through the main door that you came in, and we congregate up in Fitzroy Square up there, so that is that out of the way. And I don't really want to take too much thunder from the team who've been working really hard to get this report ready and to put on the event this morning. I'm going to hand over very quickly to Muniya, who's from Business London and who's going to chair our event this morning. I just really wanted to make 3 quick points before we get started. The first is just some thanks. So thank you very much to Business London. This has been a really fantastic collaboration. In an organisation like Arup, it's often very helpful to have a partner. It helps you get started on these kind of initiatives, and it helps you to get them finished or at least published. So that's been fantastic, and thank you very much for sort of hosting all the stakeholder sessions, bringing your members in to have conversations around this idea. It was fantastic. The report itself and the idea that you're going to hear more about from Stephen in a minute is, I think, really exciting. It's a really exciting opportunity for the UK. I'm not going to talk any more about that because you're going to hear about it from others. But reading the report again this morning on the train, there's a really gem of an idea in there, I think, that's we're just really hoping that we can develop with some of you. And that is my final point. The report itself is only a provocation. It's just an idea. We're not necessarily saying that we as Arup are going to try and take this forward. I mean, we might, but we're not sure. We really just want to put it out there into the world as an idea, and to see what sort of response we get back. We're looking for people to help us take the idea forward, looking to hear from offset suppliers, people wanting to buy credits, people who are up for sort of aggregating their purchasing power to really invest in high quality UK offsetting credits. So with that, I'm going to finish and hand over to Muniya. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben, and thanks so much to Arup for hosting us. I think I've said to everyone how much I absolutely love this space. It's really fantastic. So welcome to the launch of this Business London Arup report towards a net zero future. And we've got common cause with Arup, and many of you here, around addressing the pressing challenge of climate change and looking at innovative solutions that can help us meet our ambitious climate targets and deliver growth for the capital in the UK. And this report really does set out a really exciting blueprint for a private sector-led collective emissions offsetting fund, and we're really excited that we've been able to work with Arup and so many of our members and stakeholders on this report. So the format for today is we've got a panel of experts who are going to share their insights on the opportunities and challenges of this initiative, and there are challenges with something of this scale. And then we're going to hear first from my colleague from the report, Stephen Thompson, and then we'll bring the panel on and we'll open it up to questions. Please do put your hand up if you want to ask a question. We'll whiz a mic round, but don't wait until the very end, because sometimes that happens and then we get lots of questions and we run out of time. So please do feel free to quiz the panel on the report. So without much ado, let me hand over to Stephen Thompson from Arup, one of the report's key authors, who's going to give us an overview of the report. Stephen.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm really excited about this. I hope you are too. So here we go. So I'm going to just, before we kind of delve into the actual report, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about kind of the context of where this sits, because I think it's important that we start off. And I'm just going to explain a little bit about the UK emissions gap. So we should all be fairly familiar with what I'm presenting on the screen here, which is the UK's pathway to achieve net zero. So this is from the Climate Change Committee's 6th carbon budget. And as you can see here, we need to dramatically reduce our emissions towards 2050, which totals around about 100 million tonnes per year. However, what you're probably a little less familiar with is the component that sits underneath this graph, which is the greenhouse gas emissions that we need to remove from our atmosphere. And as you can see at the moment, we need to dramatically increase the volume of greenhouse gas emissions that we remove within the United Kingdom to achieve that 2050 target. And to scare us all completely, that equates to around 1.3 billion tonnes of emissions that we need to be removing between now and 2050. So the scale of this task is enormous, so we need to do something about it. So what can we do as individual organisations? So hopefully we're all really familiar with the emissions management hierarchy. We have potentially created a baseline, or we are working to set up our baseline. The next step is then to think about what we are actually trying to do to decarbonise. So what is our target to align with a 1.5 degree centigrade world? And during that process, we might choose to avoid, switch, and improve. And eventually, we will come down and we will have got below that original target. And we can probably say that we have successfully decarbonised. However, for many of us, we are still going to be in a situation where we still have residual emissions. So we need to remove those for us to truly claim that we are net zero, moving towards climate positive. So how do we do this? Well, to start off with, we might choose to remove those greenhouse gas emissions from our atmosphere within our own assets. Say, for example, if you have any land, but not all of us own potential large chunks of land. The second is removing greenhouse gas emissions within our value chain. Again, might be slightly more challenging. So what we tend to turn to is purchasing credits look at removal, outside of our value chain by purchasing carbon credits from the voluntary carbon market. And that is the focus of today's presentation. Ultimately, net zero is just a coincidental moment in time. We are transitioning towards climate positive, where we are removing more emissions than we are emitting. So what is the potential of the voluntary carbon market? Well, very simply, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, it's a series of organisations who have those residual emissions who are looking to purchase credits to offset their emissions. There are a whole host of schemes, many of which we are joined by in the room today, which is absolutely delightful, of organisations who are looking to either avoid, reduce or remove greenhouse gas emissions on organisations' behalf. And it's very simple. There's a simple cash exchange. So cash is passed from UK organisations to pay for offset schemes, and then in turn those credits are returned back to those organisations to be used for your own climate commitments. Now, within Arup, we think this is a real opportunity, not just on climate, but we think that there's an opportunity here to direct more of that finance to be able to have a wider benefit. So not just thinking about climate, we're also thinking about social value, we're thinking about nature restoration, we're thinking about biodiversity. These are the concepts of where the voluntary carbon market has real potential, and that is something that we want to leverage. So what is happening at the moment in the UK? So some of us are already purchasing carbon credits to the tune of around 150 to 200 million pounds per year. And the vast majority of that investment is going into projects outside of the United Kingdom, into some fab projects in the global south and various places around the rest of the world. However, we know, unfortunately, that some of those schemes have been proven to be challenging or not necessarily meeting the requirements that UK organisations expect. And so therefore there is a growing momentum to be able to purchase and look towards schemes that sit within the United Kingdom. Therefore, greater level of assurances, potentially being able to go see it, touch it, smell it, and see the benefit that is happening within the United Kingdom. So when we turn to the UK, the cupboard is pretty bare if you're looking to be able to purchase carbon credits at the moment. Now, that's not to say that there aren't some fabulous schemes, but in general, the scale that is needed is not quite there at the moment. So as part of this piece of work, we've had the delight of being able to work with a whole range of different organisations who are currently creating schemes in the voluntary carbon market. And we're hearing the same message that's coming back. They want to scale, they want to grow, but we need long-term commitments, we need upfront capital, and we need the necessary infrastructure for us to be able to grow. I should also add at this point that 150 to 200 million pounds a year might sound like a large amount of money. It probably is. It is for me. However, in 2024, there's a group of organisations who are looking to purchase carbon credits to address their residual emissions. And so therefore, that's what's happening on the spot market at the moment. However, be warned, as we approach towards 2030 and 2040 and 2050, we're going to see a significant demand increase. And is the supply going to keep up? So, as a very simple doodle here, it's going to be a little bit more competitive to be able to secure carbon credits in the future. So what are we going to do about it? So this is the principles of today's report, which is trying to aggregate and think about the challenges that are both at the supply side, but also those who are looking to purchase carbon credits. And so we are proposing the creation of a fund based on 4 very straightforward principles. It gives access to any organisation to be able to make advanced purchases to secure future supply of carbon credits. The second component of the fund will be that the fund will actually do the due diligence to ensure that these carbon credits are vetted and are meeting the quality criteria that we expect. The third is that it aggregates that finance to be able to inject that into UK schemes to be able to supply our demand for the future. And then finally, and probably one of the most important elements, is that we want to look beyond climate. So we want to make sure that these schemes that we are investing in are demonstrating wider co-benefits and that they are measured. So how would this work? I can see the phones coming up. It's fun, everyone's taking pictures. So UK organisations, us as a whole, would be contributing to the fund. The fund would then aggregate that investment and be able to collect that and invest that into seed projects. And we want to think about seed projects because we want to demonstrate that financial additionality. So the fund would then look at the variety of different offset schemes that are available and then look to support those which meet the criteria. Now, within the report, we focus, there's an element which focuses around local authorities and local government. Now, we recognise that local authorities are looking to be able to advance their own decarbonisation pathways and to develop their own initiatives and schemes. And so we would welcome local authorities to contribute these opportunities to seek investment from the fund. But most importantly, we would be looking to make sure that those schemes are certified, measured, to demonstrate that they have actually achieved what they're looking for. So once the fund has vetted those schemes, that investment occurs. And I think we should all be very clear that these things will just not appear overnight. Say, for example, you're looking at a nature-based solution. We're not going to be able to remove greenhouse gas emissions as soon as you pay that money. We're going to have to wait for that to grow and establish. So we have to acknowledge the fact that this is a future supply that we are thinking about, and therefore we're going to have to wait for those carbon credits to mature. Once they do mature, they will get handed back to UK organisations, at which point we can then use that in our own corporate reporting and our own climate claims. So what's the fund's offer to the market? Well, put simply, there's a simple shopfront window where there are three options which the fund is going to provide. A potential for social retrofit, so to give you the opportunity to invest in avoidance schemes that have real social benefit within the United Kingdom. Greenhouse gas removals, which are focused around nature-based solutions, and then the third portfolio, which is engineered removals, which is looking at the real, at-scale, durable storage of greenhouse gas emissions. Now, as I've mentioned earlier, the UK Collective Offsetting Fund doesn't just focus purely on climate, and so one of our key focuses here is to ensure that we bring in a wider set of benefits beyond just climate. So within these credits is going to come excellent social value, biodiversity, range of different additional co-benefits which come with these schemes, and that's really important. So I'm excited by this report. I think that there is a real potential here to pool our collective investment, not only to be able to secure our future supply of carbon credits, but it also decouples us from potential price volatility. But really excitingly, it gives us the ability to demonstrate real benefit to our environment and our communities at which our businesses and our organisations exist within the United Kingdom. So go away, have a read of this report, and then come back to us, because we would like to collaborate with you to take this concept into something that we think is truly transformational. Thank you very much for your time.
Stephen, please don't go away yet. We've got a brilliant panel for you. And Stephen, thank you so much for the work again that's gone into this with the Arup team, and to Ioana at Business London, who's led from our side. So we're going to have lots of opportunity to touch on the points that Stephen has raised. And I'm going to invite my fellow panellists on the stage. We've got a great panel here for you. Ben, you are joining us as Director for Climate and Sustainability Services in Arup. And we're also joined by Matt Prescott, Head of Carbon Strategy at Heathrow Airport. Matt's responsible for setting up Heathrow's net zero strategy and implementing decarbonisation and carbon removal programs across the organisation. We have Robert Jenkins, who's the lead on Delancy's responsible investment strategy. And from 2018, Robert's implemented the integration of sustainability and environmental initiatives into the business. And finally, to provide the credit provider's perspective, we have Sarah Brownlie, who's Programme Director at Wilder Carbon. So please do join me. It's great to have you here today.
Sorry, I moved that, sorry.
So thank you for joining us. Ben, I'm going to kick off with you now. Ben, you and Stephen have been really instrumental in bringing this report to fruition with us. It's a really ambitious idea, as we've seen. It's pitched at a high level based on your conversations with businesses and stakeholders, but how much appetite do you see for this fund, and what needs to happen next to make it a reality?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to say there is that we had no problem at all attracting people to come along to the workshops when we wanted to talk about this idea. We were pretty much oversubscribed and with a really good diversity of different organisations who were interested. More than that, if we step back from that, I think the opportunity, as Stephen has outlined in his presentation, is pretty clear. I don't think I've ever seen a climate action plan that doesn't acknowledge residual emissions. The Climate Change Committee is telling us how much carbon we've got to remove from the atmosphere. We're hearing already that UK organisations spending 150 to 100 million pounds a year, and it's growing. So I think we've got a group of businesses that we've engaged with directly who we know are excited. We see a broader industry. Everything's pointing to that being like a really big opportunity for the UK. In terms of what needs to happen next, I mean, as I said in the opening remarks, we haven't necessarily done this thinking that this is something that we are going to take forward. We're not experts in managing funds. I don't think Business London are either. But it's an idea that we are inviting people to come in and collaborate with us on. And there's lots of detail that would have to go into further developing this idea before it could become a reality. But we're quite interested in exploring that with partners. So I think in terms of what happens next, we should be clear that today we're just putting out a report. It's just meant to see if we can encourage people to get in touch and to help us further develop the thinking.
Thank you, Ben. Matt, if I can come to you, Heathrow has ambitious plans to reach net zero, and you've got clear targets in place to cut, I think, carbon by 15% in the air and 45% on the ground by 2030. What actions are you taking when it comes to cutting emissions? How are you going to get there, and how are you using the offsetting market at the moment to support removals?
Yeah, so I mean, it's worth starting with the abatement question, because that is the most important thing, that we reduce our emissions as far as possible. And you mentioned the 2030 targets. We felt that it's really important to have relatively near-term targets on the journey to net zero, because that really focuses the mind and enables us to focus our investments as well. So on the ground, we divide our challenge into two, in the air and on the ground. On the ground, we're investing close to £1 billion over the next 8 or 9 years in decarbonising the airport infrastructure itself. Interestingly, DfT, under the previous administration, has put forward the notion of zero carbon airports by 2040. So it may be that if that comes to fruition, there won't be any residual emissions on the ground. In the air, the big focus is on sustainable aviation fuel. Interestingly, we offer our passengers the opportunity to buy SAF offsets, so it's possible to attribute the Scope 3 directly to passengers for sustainable aviation fuel, which is a really good way of raising the profile of that solution as part of our abatement efforts. In terms then of offsets and removals, we've been focused since 2017 on UK nature-based projects, so starting with peatland projects in Lancashire back in, I think it was delivered in 18, and we've got a profile of a portfolio of pending issuance units from the peatland and woodland codes. But what's really important for us, I think, is scale. So the aviation sector does need the engineered removals as well. Nature-based alone won't be sufficient. But also there's a lot more scope within nature-based than those two codes that everyone regularly refers to. And actually, some of the more innovative projects that are looking at whole ecosystems and landscape scale restoration are really important. So we've also put funding behind projects where we won't get any credit for it, but we think from an innovation point of view, they're really important. So I think that sort of summarises our approach.
Thank you, Matt. And you had a bit of a win in the King's speech as well on SAF.
It was really pleasing to see the King's speech refer to intentions around sustainable aviation fuel. There was nothing new in there, but it really does give us confidence that this administration will back that solution.
We'll talk about the new government's agenda on net zero later in the panel. Robert, let me come to you. How do you see the role of responsible investment evolving in the context of increasing regulatory and voluntary pressures to reduce emissions? And what are the challenges and opportunities that you see for real estate investors in integrating carbon offset strategies into their portfolios?
Well, I'm a responsible investment director at Delancy, so I'm going to say that responsible investment needs to intensify its role. its role. It also needs to elevate consideration of the risks around emissions and the opportunities at investment making decision situations. Carbon emission reduction is definitely strengthening its impact on financial performance. I think many people in the room will know that, but there are a lot of people in the real estate investment world where their idea of a sustainable building is one that's got a strong EPC rating and a BREEAM certification, and that's it. They don't look at the sort of devaluation risk of transitional stranding or climate-related physical hazards. At present, we're looking at funding a London office block, and the sponsor refurbished it back in 2020. It got a BREEAM Excellent, EPCA. It's done no work on any assessment of CREM or physical risks. It's a JV with two well-known organisations. I suspect it was a fund that was set up 6 or 7 years ago. We're still looking into the technical due diligence, but I just don't think it's got those considerations on its radar, and I think there's an element of short-sightedness in that it's only looking to exit and not seeing the scrutiny that will be applied by potential purchasers. And maybe because the knowledge isn't out there in the market, they're banking on potential purchasers that aren't aware. So it is definitely the role of responsible investment, I guess, is trying to communicate more widely across the industry. Aside from that, investors and finance parties are shifting their priority to wanting to work with organisations that have got a clear strategy on decarbonisation and hopefully a track record of performance on that. That's evidenced by, I think it was last week, there was a news press release about Access Pool, a £45 billion local government pension scheme, seeking an impact real estate investment manager to implement a decarbonisation focused mandate. So it's out there. The other thing is investors spend a lot of time reporting the level of scrutiny and detail on emissions, and the request to understand the metrics and methodology has definitely increased over the years, and we're having to look at feeding back information on scopes, methodology, whether it's been audited, embodied greenhouse gas emissions, operational life period emissions, GHG intensity, whether it's been science-based target aligned, any near-term targets for decarbonisation, longer-term net zero carbon commitments. It is all very involved. But for us, we're really focusing at the upper end of the energy hierarchy. We haven't embarked into the world of offsets, and we're just trying to shrink our residual emissions as much as possible.
Thanks, Robert. That's very helpful. Sarah, Stephen touched on some of the challenges that offsetting schemes in the UK face. How do you see those challenges based on your experience, and how could a fund like this support credit providers to overcome some of those barriers?
Yeah, so first of all, congratulations on the report. I've read through, and I think it's refreshing to see some practical steps put out on how to overcome those barriers. So what I'm going to do is just build on the barriers that were identified in the report, but from a schemes perspective. So for context, Wilder Carbon is a natural climate solution. So we realise the carbon benefit from wilding projects here in the UK. We want to see that carbon benefit realised, obviously, but we also have a requirement that our projects have a biodiversity uplift as well. So that is good for nature and climate. So the report mentions barriers. Credibility and transparency has really been a key barrier for us. So Stephen mentioned earlier about the massive requirement for the UK to decarbonise and also look at removals now, but that also there was a tendency to buy internationally. International voluntary carbon markets are just much more established than what we have in the UK in some respects. What we haven't got in the UK is a strong voluntary carbon market voice. So we've had no central strong position from the government for a very, very long time. That's starting to change. We've got the nature market principles that have been released. They're under consultation, and they look pretty strong. And they're aligned to emerging mechanisms like the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market's Core Carbon Principle. I'm trying not to use acronyms, but that's a really long thing to say. But that looks at the core carbon principles that you want to see in a scheme. So the market governance is starting to form, but it's taken a really long time. And so what has happened is that there's really skilled, amazing schemes that have mobilised the skills, the talent, the metrics, the mechanisms required to be able to deliver these carbon removal projects in the UK with a very slow market following it. So the market infrastructure is there. But we need the pace to quicken so that we can get the projects going to meet those targets. So the thing about nature-based is that it takes time for these projects to establish. You're looking at 5 years before you're getting verified carbon credits from a nature-based project. So we need to invest money now to get the projects going to make sure that when we get to 2030, that crunch point, again, we're not looking at that empty cupboard. So credibility and transparency has been an issue. So the transparency around scheme and quality stamps, but also around trading. We know that people are buying UK credits, but it's very low volume because they're used to international prices, because internationally it's able to operate at scale. In the UK, if you want quality, if you want assurance of durability for your carbon credits, you're going to have to pay a premium. This is not something you want to buy cheap, buy twice. You're not going to get the opportunity to do that. So it's really about looking carefully at what schemes you purchase from in the UK. The fund, therefore, is going to really bolster that credibility. Something that we've lacked is that end-to-end follow-through for high integrity. We've got lots of mechanisms that are looking at the quality of the projects. How do we assess the quality of the projects? So rating systems and standards. And then we've also got initiatives like the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative, the VCMI, and SBTI, who are looking at how people use those carbon credits. But the market infrastructure is lacking to see that through from end to end, something that Wilder Carbon has addressed through its own structure, but also the fund can act as a mechanism to assure that integrity from the multi-facing entrant rules that it's suggested. So that was a really strong point for me. The other things in the policy were price volatility. I talked about price, so I won't labour the point, but really around the wholesale of carbon, the transactions are taking so very long. Procurement processes are having to be designed from scratch because people are not sure how to approach it. They know they want quality, they know they want co-benefits, they know they want the cherry on top for your carbon credit, but procurement processes, ultimately, it comes down to price. And we've had conversations with businesses who say we want to be seen to be doing the right thing and do a good carbon credit transaction. But it comes down to price, and they end up going for something that's cheaper and potentially not high integrity. So there's risks around the price and the procurement systems not enabling a high quality transaction. The fund will enable that with its requirements and prerequisites. There's also been confusion around the different types of credits, the heterogeneity nature of carbon credits, the different technologies that we use. The report excellently maps out the different types of technologies that are available for carbon credits and really how to approach those different technologies and also the price point. So it's a really strong guide of how to approach the different types of credits. And just some practical barriers. around, we talked about procurement, but just aggregation scale. So again, the fund is just going to provide a funnel, both for the supply and the demand side, really to enable transparency around trading and really provide much more stronger market signals, which is what we all need. We've reached a bit of a standoff between the demand and supply side. Everyone's waiting for someone to move. So I think the fund will get that flow of revenue and get that confidence and transparency to provide those stronger market indicators for both demand and supply.
Thanks, Sarah. That was really helpful feedback on the report. Just a question to everyone. We've focused sort of predominantly on the role of the private sector, but clearly there's a role for the public sector. So, Ben, maybe I'll come to you first, given your role in the report, but what role do you see the public sector playing in offsetting? And I know we touched on Section 106 in the report. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I can, yes. So yeah, that is actually a point that we haven't talked about from the report, but there is a section in the report which outlines what used to be called allowable solutions or Section 106 funds, which are set up in every London borough and actually some councils outside of London as well. And what that is basically developers who are developing in that borough, going through the planning system, are evidencing how much carbon they can reduce in the construction of their new development, but they can't get quite far enough. So they pay a contribution into the local government, which is referred to as a Section 106 fund or allowable solutions fund. So in London, 32 boroughs, lots of funds all around the capital. And what we found, well, it's quite well documented actually prior to our report, but it's referenced in our report, is that not all of that money is being spent. And where it is being spent, there's not complete transparency about what it's being spent on. And I guess perhaps most importantly in relation to this report, the projects that it is spent on don't generate offset credits. So those developers who are having to pay that money out essentially to get through planning don't get any benefit back in terms of a published or certified credit. So we think there's opportunity there in terms of working, either trying to convene some of the boroughs to work together at scale to do something similar to what we're describing, but aggregating up the local Section 106 funds, or to start contributing some of that money into this fund that we're describing now, such that we get that scale and we get all the accreditation, verification that would be required through the process. So is that a bit of a summary?
Rob, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I've got personal experience of that situation where we were in conversation with a local planning authority. The calculation was clear. There was no dispute over that. It was just we weren't clear on what was happening to that money. And as I said, investors have increased their scrutiny on environmental performance, ESG performance. And we can't account for that money. We suggested that actually the money could be put towards a local school close to the asset that we were seeking planning for, to change from a gas boiler to air source heat pump. But the response back was that it would complicate the 106 agreement. So it's just gone. So it's frustrating from an investor point of view. I don't really know the approach from the local planning authority, but I think the summary in the report, and I'm remiss for not sort of saying how clear and concise and helpful the report is at the start, but it summarises that situation really well.
Thank you, Robert. I'm going to open it up to questions. We've got about 25 minutes, so please do pop your hand up. Tell us which organisation you're from and your name, and if there's a particular panellist you want to address your question to as well. So we've got a roving mic, so let me open it up. Yes.
How long have you got? Mike Keaveney Granger, PLC, so we're a listed residential landlord. Just to pick up a point, I think the Section 106 stuff is operational carbon only at the moment. It's not embodied carbon. And you're absolutely right, you can't get credits from it because you don't even know if it's sold. Ignoring that, so I haven't read the report, obviously, so I'm a bit blind to it. But it seems I've got a couple of observations for you. Don't take them as criticism. They're more about pragmatism. If you use it for social infrastructure, like decarbonising existing buildings, that's operational carbon. So it's almost like a stopgap compared to actually removing carbon at source, the green on your graph. Do we know, well, I think I know the answer. We at Grainger, we use a thing called value for carbon. So value for money, value for carbon, and you look at both. The problem with the green is the carbon intensity. So per pound, what you'll get back from that initiative will be different. How do you... So, and if I was investing, I'd want the maximum amount of money versus carbon. So I'd want the technology or the opportunity that delivered the most amount of carbon reduction. But they all have different carbon reduction. So how do you aggregate across those, if you see what I mean? I think that's the first question. The second one, for me, the social infrastructure bit, the kind of decarbonising fund is either you do it and everyone can do it, or actually it's not really carbon reduction in the right sense. Offsets should be based on, as we say, removing carbon at source or sequestering carbon, let's put it that way, rather than reducing the carbon, the operational carbon from social housing stock. And so I think if you're going to do the latter, you should do it everywhere. Forget about greening, sequestration. Do that bit first across everything, and then move on to sequestration. How's that for a question?
Ben, do you want to jump in?
I can come in on that, yeah. So you're absolutely right. There are different types of existing offset credits. They mature over different periods. They have different values. They generate, as you say, different amounts of carbon per pound spent. So that's all accepted. That all exists within the current market. I think what Stephen in his report has suggested for this model, and I think there was a slide on here where he had like 3 shop windows, is that you have those different credits all within an aggregated fund, because actually what the market needs is a kind of a staggered approach where some credits can mature in 1 or 2 years at a certain price, others are going to be a longer term investment, they're going to cost more, but you know that you're going to be delivering actual sequestration, as you say. So I think that's probably my sort of short form answer to your question, is that we recognise, I mean, I think CDP did a report 5 or 6 years ago that I remember reading that said you can buy a ton of credit for £2 up to £500, right? So it's a fairly big range. But I think what we're saying in this aggregated fund is that you'd have all those different types of credits in there, and that you would, and that the buyers would be able to purchase different credits from it, but the fund itself would aggregate them together. Maybe Stephen wants to come in and expand on that point a little bit if I've got anything slightly wrong.
So I don't know who answered the question, but Fab. No, it's a great question, and I think one of the reasons why the fund structure was set up with the 3 different portfolios was to give organisations a choice to make sure that it was inclusive. So say, for example, you really value social value as part of your process, then this fund is catering to that, because it gives you the opportunity to just solely focus on the social value and the retrofit component. However, if you're really passionate about the greenhouse gas removals component, you don't have to touch the social component, because you can be focusing on the nature and the engineered removals. And then within each of those individual portfolios, it gives you the opportunity to say, well, we recognise that some of those projects are going to cost a little bit more, some are going to cost a little bit less. So therefore, it's aggregating all of those projects to create a flat price to allow you to be able to invest in a variety of schemes, because it means that you're not tied to just the most expensive or to the cheapest. It gives you that breadth within that consolidated approach and that aggregated view.
Can
I ask a follow-up question just quickly? So that's a great answer, and I like the idea of a fund, effectively a portfolio, which is what that is. The issue will then be some things are easy to measure in terms of their carbon reduction. Some things are very hard to measure, and retrofitting is a very hard thing to measure in terms of your pound for carbon. So I see that as a big... And other technologies like carbon capture might get cheaper, and that's all fine. But particularly that one, that is a real minefield, because if you go for deep retrofit, which is a really bad idea, frankly, it costs a fortune. So the measurement of that bit is going to be the hardest thing that you deliver, I think.
Yeah. Is it okay, just very quickly respond, because I know other people need to get questions in. Yeah, sure. I agree with you. I guess I would say that the market is already set up with verification Vera methodologies which allow us to go through a process of quantifying emissions reductions from things like retrofit, and actually Arup and colleagues here are working with PNZ Carbon at the moment doing exactly that. So it is complicated, but there are processes and it's all sort of third-party verified. So I think that's important to say. I think very, very quickly, you did make a point in your original question about this whole kind of value for money, like do the cheap things first. And I would just respond on that to say, in principle, I completely agree. In practice, I think it's too late. We've got to do all of it together. If we were only going to follow the emissions hierarchy in the purest sense, we wouldn't be having a conversation about offsetting now. The reality is every organisation is going to need to buy offsets because they can't do it all through straight reductions, and that these projects take a long time to set up, so we kind of need to move now so that the market is ready when the credits need to be bought. So just coming back on that last point, I totally agree in principle. I think practice, it's everything.
Sorry, I didn't mean cheap, I meant quickest.
Okay.
So removing carbon, operational carbon is quickest compared to the others, not cheap.
Okay.
Matt, can I bring you in?
Yeah, I'm conscious others might want to come in with questions, but I just had two remarks. One was that, as Sarah mentioned, the core carbon principles of the ICVCM, and I think that's a really important reference point. If you've looked at those, you'll see that they only recognise carbon removal credits, and that's really important. So for Heathrow's net zero objective, we won't count offsets that are anything other than carbon removal credits for that residual. That said, as Ben quite rightly points out, all activity in the near term, whether it is avoided, reduced or removed, is beneficial because a tonne of carbon today is worth more than a tonne of carbon tomorrow. So that's really important. And on your asset point, I agree with the sentiment. I mean, we apply a margin abatement cost curve to determine where we invest our significant capital in decarbonising the airport. But it is important as well to recognise pathways. So, lowest hanging fruit make a lot of sense financially, but exactly as you say, carbon value is extremely important to bear in mind, because otherwise we might find that what we're left with are feel like illogical or unaffordable solutions in due course. So we have to think really about the whole transition, not just the immediate asset portfolio in front of us today, but anticipate ahead for a smooth transition.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, gentleman there, middle.
Thank you, Ian Rogers, Arup. So we have a biodiversity crisis. We've lost 99% of our water vole. Insect populations are crashing. The internet is awash with people going, where the hell are all the insects? So I'm very interested in how this fund can address that. Ben, what would be the single biggest step that could be taken next to realise this idea?
Sounds like one for you, Ben.
Well, I'm just thinking, I've talked a lot. Maybe I'll throw it over to other people. I mean, I think the single biggest step is for us to find someone who will work alongside us to operate this fund. And look, I'm happy to share that since we started this work, we have engaged, some fund managers have come forward to us. They are interested in exploring it further. We are not through the process of kind of doing all that proper due diligence and evaluation yet, but we are interested to continue having those conversations. I don't think this idea can really kind of get any traction until we have a fund manager in place. So that is, I think, the first and most important step. But I should stop talking.
Sarah, do you have views on how we get this off the ground?
I might come back on the nature point first, if I may. We couldn't not answer that, but I think that the fact that, as Stephen said, the fund wants to recognise that these solutions need to be multi-purpose. We've got a number of different crises that we're trying to tackle, not just climate. And so I think knowing that you've put prerequisites in the report about the types of solutions that you use, again mentioning the ACROA and the CCP, all of these all of these principles set out that if it's a nature-based solution, it needs to factor in wider environmental considerations, risks, benefits, no net loss, no harm, etc. Obviously, if you use a scheme like Wilder Carbon, which is geared towards ecosystem functionality, it will then go a step further and ensure that it does actually have a demonstrable uplift for biodiversity, ecosystems are functioning, therefore actually you're seeing higher outcomes for your carbon benefit, a more durable carbon benefit as well as those benefits for nature. So I think because the fund has already suggested that they want to see those prerequisites around the different technologies used, i.e. nature-based, it needs to be good for nature too, then the fund can ensure that that's happening. And because of those standards, all of this has to be transparent. It's UK, you can go and see it, feel it, etc. So I think it's been covered really well in the report to say how we would ensure that happens. In terms of making it happen, you just need willingness. You need a coalition of the willing to come forward and say, we're going to put the time and the effort and the commitment in to help you deliver it. I think that there's so many reports and ideas and lots of people waiting for someone to take that ownership. It just needs to happen. So as the report says, get in touch with Stephen and let us know how you can help.
Probably got time for one more question. Oh, someone's going to have a trek up the stairs to the balcony, but yes, at the top there. Yeah.
Sorry for making you walk up the stairs. Thank you. Alex from UK GBC. It's sort of a follow-on question from that, really, because you were talking about the co-benefits, etc. Now, obviously, carbon credits, and there's also discussion around sort of BNG credits, water credits, neutrality credits. Is there potential for a fund like this to also operate in those areas, or is that scope creep and it's perhaps more impactful just to focus on one area and just recognise that co-benefits come with some of the solutions, but without formally having those credits within the fund? Has there been discussion around that?
Yes, shall I jump in first? So I think any good land-based scheme is currently looking at how they assess any project that's put forward. Any landowner is currently looking at the wider opportunities and also, to be frank, the sustainable business model that's going to enable them to do this for these really long periods of time. For Wilder Carbon, it's a minimum 50-year management agreement that we have to put in place. We are obviously operating on a carbon model, but we're very much looking at how we can leverage all different types of innovative nature finance to enable this nature recovery. When projects come through and you're doing eligibility checks for them, all of that is considered. It's what's the sustainability of this project, the viability, how is it going to sustain for the long period of time. Carbon finance alone traditionally won't actually pay for all the works and the maintenance that need to be done. And so quite often land managers will look at the opportunity to stack with BNG spatially or temporarily. And Wilder Carbon specifically are looking at testing a explicitly bundled voluntary carbon and biodiversity credit. So you get the biodiversity as a co-benefit, but for future projects, could we potentially allow you to make a high integrity claim for that biodiversity contribution as well? So we're looking at how that could happen in practice.
Matt, can I bring you in?
Yeah, just quickly, I fully support Sarah's account, and I think that's one of the advantages of Wilder Carbon is the flexibility. And that's really important. Obviously, simplicity is also attractive from a communications point of view. But my only other remark would be, and kind of touched also on the previous question, is around, to mix metaphors, climate is a keystone issue for nature. If we're looking at a potential task force for nature-related financial disclosure, Heathrow's principal impact on nature is through climate. So, we've got a complex system, and it will be good for us to remain nimble and agile and thoughtful about how that complex system can be delivered, but through hopefully a relatively few channels, because we don't want initiative-itis. We want to bring everything together so everyone kind of is looking in the same direction.
Thank you, Matt. Just one final question to me for the whole panel. So we had a King's speech yesterday. We've got a new government. What are you looking just sort of zooming out a minute from offset, the fund's one part of the solution, but what are you looking for the new government to do next to accelerate the transition to net zero? And Robert, I'll come to you first.
Well, we haven't got a house view. It's my view. Well, we need a certainty on the direction of travel, and everything's been short term, and things have been changing. So it'd be nice just for everything to sort of settle down and actually have a clear strategy, but also, I suppose, supportive policies where they are going to accelerate a pipeline of investable projects. I'd really like us to become a scientific superpower on green innovation and advance sort of technical education and transparency of where we are in our carbon budget. Those are the sorts of things I would like them to do.
Matt?
Well, the big opportunities around sustainable aviation fuel, as you mentioned, so really delighted to see the reference in the King's Speech yesterday. Huge opportunity for the UK, particularly around second generation, so waste-based fuels. And really this is about industrial cooperation, because if we're able to develop the supply chains, the skills, the pipelines around sustainable fuels, well, that has application to multiple sectors. So really core part of sector decarbonisation for aviation, but also more broadly. And aviation is generally the poster child for environmental harm, but actually with the right industrial strategy, we can unlock a lot of investment into solutions that do impact more widely. So that I'm pretty excited about the opportunity.
Sarah, what do you want to see?
Well, I'm already quite encouraged by what I've seen. The bills that were announced yesterday in the King's Speech were really encouraging. I think the main thing for me was what seems to be quite a strategic approach between ministers. So what we saw announced yesterday were things like the I forget what it's called, infrastructure bill, where they were talking about water quality. They were talking about nature recovery to unlock housing. They were talking about climate, nature and infrastructure in the same sentence. So that to me is, it's very encouraging. And if we can continue down that road, not reinvent the wheel, but utilise the things that are already in motion, then we shouldn't waste too much time.
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, being completely honest, it's been 2 weeks. I'm still trying to get my head around the 5 missions and what that kind of mean in practice. I saw Chris Stark's appointment over the weekend for Mission Net Zero, or whatever it's called. Okay, so a couple of things that strike me is, lots of talk around skills, and obviously the idea that we've been talking about and the market that we see developing that we've been chatting about this morning is going to demand kind of lots of new skills in terms of land management, verification, accounting, etc. And also competition for land. I mean, because it's not just the energy. It's also the sort of housing targets, whatever it is, 1.5 million new homes, new towns. They're all on sites which, well, they're not. They're actually on a mixture of sites, from what I can understand. But some of them might be greenfield. Some of that land might also be appropriate for some of these markets we've been discussing. So I think at a very practical level, I guess there's always been a competition for land. It's something they're not making any more of, right?
Right, so with that, I think we're going to bring this session to a close. So we've tried to address some of the challenges around scale, transparency and credibility in the voluntary carbon market with this report. But as Sarah put it, we really need a coalition of the willing to get this off the ground. So if you are interested in finding out more, please do speak to Stephen, Ben or Ioana from Business London. Thank you so much again to our partners Arup in delivering this report. Thank you to members and stakeholders who fed in. We've got a chance to grab another quick cup of coffee, so if you want to chat a bit more about the report and how you can get involved in the next stages, please do. And you can download the report from the QR code, which I think will appear at some point, and we'll get it sent out to you. So thank you all very much, and I hope you have a lovely day.